Hi everyone, Samantha Varnu here from Prosymmetry. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to kick off our fall webinar series with this annual planning webinar. To kick us off, Donna Fitzgerald will be discussing more of the best practices and to give you guys some more insight on, what's kind of industry standard for annual planning. And with that said, a few housekeeping items. So if you have any questions, please submit them in the question box. We will try to get to them at the end, but in case we don't have time, I will make sure that we follow up with answers to those questions. And feel free to ask. We love helping however we can. Additionally, we are going to be hosting about a webinar a week at this point. So feel free to visit our website and look at the resources and webinar section to register for those. Webinars are open to all Tempus users, your leadership teams, so feel free to share those with your team, and I hope that you get the chance to join. And the one that I really wanted to highlight is on October 13th, we are going to be hosting our second virtual user conference. We're really excited about this. So first, if you would like to be a speaker at that event, please let me know. We would love for you as a Tempus user, as a power user of Tempus, to speak and share your knowledge with the Tempus community. And additionally, if you would like to attend or you would like your team to attend, feel free to register for that and send that link over to them as well. A few invites will be going out in the upcoming weeks. With those housekeeping items out of the way, Donna, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Sam. So for those of you who don't know, I used to be a CFO. So annual planning has a definite meaning to me because I did it for a lot of years. So this is a combination of things I've reflected on that might help all of you somewhat reframe the exercise. Traditionally, from my perspective, resource management has been very reactive. It's primarily about what we call resource allocation or resource assignment. But as all of us know, the key becomes what's really driving things. And if we get back to the initial drivers at the start of the plan, everything from there goes a lot easier. So I'm going to contend that the secret to an executable annual plan is doing resource capacity planning well. Now, in my mental model, we have resource capacity planning, which you all understand, basically ensuring that the demand equals the supply. And for those of you in IT, I will freely admit that I don't think I've ever seen an annual plan close where demand equaled supply in the last 2 decades. I just have never seen it, but that's the root of what we're trying to do. And there's a whole nother presentation on how to prove that. If we get that right, then we can start to plan for our supply of skilled people. And finally, COVID blew up everything. And 20 years ago, I didn't talk to people about people capability planning. And we could use the term resource skill development. But the key becomes we need to reintegrate our employees. We need to focus on employees a lot more. And what I perceive is that the environment is shifting significantly. So while from an annual planning perspective, resource capacity planning is at the beginning, I'll take you through briefly where both of these other subsets actually will come into our planning sphere. Now, for those of you on the call, I want to acknowledge that there are 2 basic drivers. If you are a revenue organization, if you're professional services, a lot of what I tend to pound, the drum on is less appropriate for you because revenue drives your resource plan. For IT, NPD, it's going to be strategy. Now, I have worked for a very, very large consulting firm, and I worked with a gentleman who was responsible for resource capacity planning. at that large consulting firm. It gave me some feel as to how his thoughts were. But I would like to contend that you can't just look at your piece of the pie. You need to go back and understand what's really happening in your revenue plan. What services does your firm offer? I'm sure those of you who are deeply in it have an understanding that says, if I do this kind of consulting, a specific service, I need these resources. So from a planning perspective, how many of those of each type of service is going to be sold? This is generally how you do your plan. What's the revenue goal for each service? I got it. After years and years of looking at what sales is forecasted, it's always interesting to see what it is. I've always wanted to see that, as much as anybody will let me see, depending on my role, so that I can understand what really looks aggressive and what potentially is something that maybe we might sell more of, or maybe there's a new area we're expanding into where we have some risk that it may be wildly successful, because part of all of our jobs is risk management. And that translates in our space into contingency. When something changes, are we able to respond? So we have to start with, historically, what's the accuracy of the forecast? I mean, for those of you who are not new to your company, you've got years, of annual plans and then where you ended up. If you have never taken the time to pull out last year's annual plan and last year's forecast and compared it to where you are today in detail, you're missing something incredibly important. Because what you'll start to understand, do it for 1 year, do it for 2 years, what's changed, what's moved, where were you short? How much capacity, how much under capacity have you had? How much over capacity? Most organizations worry about overcapacity, but the truth is I haven't seen a lot of that unless there's a retiring product line. Skill mix issues, new skills required for new opportunities. All of this, what you're looking for, and I'm speaking as someone who started her career as a financial analyst, what you're looking for is what's the level of accuracy that your organization tends to work with, and what direction does your organization tend to bias towards? Do they under forecast? Do they over forecast? Do they mix product lines or certain geographical regions? I have no idea, because every one of you is in a unique business and has a unique pattern. But if you've never thought to do this analysis, because it seems like it's somebody else's job to just tell you what you should be doing, knowledge is a powerful thing. So I really recommend considering it. And then build your model. Every single thing that I found in here is, if you have a model, and your model will never be perfect, but perfect isn't what you care about. Perfect is, it's impossible to get to. You want a working model that you can continue to enhance. So hopefully some of this, these suggestions will, and I don't know what your timeline is, and I don't know how much, anything. You don't need to make this gigantic. Grab anything that's simple, easy to get. Doesn't matter this year, but the point is, the more knowledge you have, the better. So for everybody else, strategy drives the resource capacity planning. And I've recently had an insight. I've always taken for granted, and the majority of us did back at Gartner, that the Harvard said the strategic plan is always okay. There are very few strategic planning errors. And I think I want to call BS on that. After several decades, as in multiple, I'm going to say that a strategic plan that is not executable is a poor strategic plan. And that's going to work out to be important in this discussion, because what usually happens is there's a strategic plan, the portfolio is then populated with things that are vaguely related to the strategic plan from each of the divisions. We tend to look at this from an RM perspective as strategic plan. That gives us a number. Let's go determine the quantity of each role. Then we look at bottlenecks. Hopefully we look at bottlenecks and are going to solve those. I'm going to talk in a moment about developing the strategic roadmap, because that's going to help a lot. Then we classically match high-level demand to supply, make sure send it to governance, and then fingers and toes crossed. What the plan is approving, we have resources currently on staff to do, or a hiring plan to do. As I've said, I once was hired by an organization that did about $60 million worth of projects a year. I sat down, we redesigned the whole thing. We were not in a position to grow staff. And we said, if we're very, very smart, sequence appropriately, do all sorts of great things, we can do, on average, 80 million. That year, the Strategic Planning Committee approved 143 million. And at that stage, at that place, it was impossible to hire. So when you have that, you really can't be successful. Our model is that we can match. And I'm going to say that's all about developing the strategic roadmap. This is a chart that most of you, unless you followed me at Gartner, have probably never seen. I worked out a long time ago that part of the problem is that we don't break strategies down, and we don't break, according to Harvard, and on this, I truly agree with them, the average company has between 3 and 5 strategies. I listed, you'll see there just 4 random strategies that I pulled out. Each one of those strategies is unique. Each one of those strategies actually has certain activities that have to happen to make that strategy real. Out in the wild, when I used to do this for a living in finance, I didn't know to do this. I've never seen anybody else really do this in a disciplined manner. The only reason I came up with it was I had the experience, and then I had some years to reflect. And that, so I'm not insulting anybody in my former profession at all. So the key becomes, if we look at 4 different strategies and separate that supposedly prioritized portfolio list into what really has to start first for each strategy, all of a sudden we have a radically different perspective of what we're resourcing. And that's really the key here. Resources drive this. Yes, we can pretty much agree, as I showed here, that we'll do that we can try to start the first 6. And then things may go completely, this is very linear that I'm showing, but by the time you get out of Q4, there's no particular number to those. Priorities have changed, everything's changed. But the key becomes here, we can resource these. We can get the corporation to tell us, in Q1, what really is your highest strategic goal? I was on the phone with a corporation, and they were very clear. Increased gross margin was their highest goal. So I reviewed their portfolio, and what they had 40% of their new projects theoretically aligned to increase gross margin. I made one statement. If they want to put it in increased gross margin, they have to give you a specific general ledger code. It's either a measurable cost reduction or it's a measurable increase in revenue. That 40% number went down to 15% of the projects. Now, just for anecdotal purposes, what I've normally seen when this is done correctly is about 10 to 15% of the projects are what you would expect at this level, and they proved that perfectly. Now, the rest of them, that's an investment decision. And as this shows, from an investment perspective, enter new markets isn't quite ready yet. So why would we try to start something in Q1? So this starts to give a different frame of reference than hurry, hurry, hurry. Let's throw everybody we can. Let's start as many, because all of you know that starting a lot of projects is a violation of critical training. If I start everything and assign people to 3, 4, 5 projects, my productivity just sucks. I can do 1 or 2 projects. A person, generally the recommendation is never assign anybody to more than 2 projects. There are exceptions, but that's the general rule for a whole lot of reasons. And we have absolute research validity about how much productivity goes down, and roughly think between 32 and 36%. I was really surprised. I was out trolling the web looking for research data, and about 35 rounded has been my percentage. And obviously I found someone else who had cranked the same numbers I had and said that we're seeing what they're calling a productivity lag of 30+% because of this problem. What does that mean? We deliver late. The other thing to understand is it's better to have project 1 and 2 done and deliver their benefit if we believe the project has a benefit. Going back to where I started, what is the goal of the strategy? How do things tie together? You don't get to set that, but you should get to understand. And the PMO, whoever's working on it, can ask questions to start to understand if this really all hangs together. Sorry, my computer there we go. So this is an example of the same thing we just looked at, basically mapped against what is a strategic roadmap. Now we can start to see, with time commitments, with everything else. And for those of you who are agile, they're still epics. Things still have due dates. Don't ever listen to anybody when they say, just give us a bucket of money and we'll give you something. And I have literally heard this from organizations. That's not strategic. I mean, we have to have plans. There's been a lot of very bad practices that have happened over the last 2 decades. Come on, we could get better. If we've been doing things in a mistakenly, fine, we'll fix it. So roadmap gives us a visual way to communicate to management. We're going to develop a new product. we're going to do project C and project D. We're going to get that done by a specific date. And then we're going to go do this other strategy, because orange is one and green is another. The key becomes we now have a visual representation, and never underestimate how much a visual representation communicates. Now, I promised at the beginning that I would be talking about the fact that once you have this, you can start to build in contingency. And when I was at Gartner, Robert Handler and I were always recommending contingency. And basically, we could prove that it got things done and it was appropriate and no one was wasted. And everybody just laughed at us and said management would never believe it. So this is me trying to come up with a way where we won't use the word contingency, and we'll look at turning other levers that are becoming very socially acceptable right now to create more supply of the right type that we can move around. Because are we going to get everything done exactly when everybody wants it? Everything? No, we're not. Because things are going to change, and the best laid plans, I don't know about the rest of you, but I've started executing strategy in an organization in January very effectively, and then a business event happened, and by March, my boss walked in and said, Donna, we're reorganizing the whole company, changed the whole general ledger, we're going to replan everything. Okay, that was life in the fast lane in Silicon Valley. So the key is the annual plan is a forecast. And if you look at lean portfolio management, which I'm an advocate for, it goes back to what we did in Silicon Valley. Every quarter, we did a 180-day rolling forecast. That's because the annual plan is nothing more than a longer-term view of what we hope will happen. Things will change, it's guaranteed. So where do we start from a resource management perspective? Fix bottleneck resources first. Now, the most successful approach I've seen has been to use what I call the team approach. If you have a bottleneck person who primarily, and this is usually the key, they have multiple skills. They're good at more than one thing, and everybody wants them because of the combination of skills that they have. The right way to do that is form a team of the bottleneck plus 3 or 4 what I'll call journeymen. These are all people who have good, if not senior level skills in some area and have some familiarity with some of the other skills that makes that bottleneck person so valuable. You're going to try to not assign the bottleneck individual anywhere. They are going to be the mentor, the plus 25% of where you're assigning the 3 or 4 journeymen. If you do this right in every case you come up with, and you'll prioritize it, you're not going to clean up all your bottlenecks all at once. But it's going to, I'm advocating that this become a normal part of how you look at things. So as you're staffing and planning capacity, we call her bottleneck Jane here. So when you look at every place that everyone wants bottleneck Jane, we're going to assign, at least mentally, everybody who's a level, who can almost do what she does. Start to build that in, and by a year from now, one hopes that Jane is no longer the bottleneck, and then we move on to the new bottleneck. We need to identify skill shortages and plan training and assignments. The better we do here, the faster it goes. Yes, we'll plan on losing about a half an FTE where you're really taking a newbie and try, to a new skill area, they're going to move slower. Again, in a year, rather than having to hire another resource, you've trained up a resource. Every organization is going to have to look at what your skill mix is, where your shortages are, and start and decide how much of this you can do. You can't solve everything overnight. I was talking to one organization, and they had a group that was a bottleneck, and they had a fixed head count, and they'd been a bottleneck for years. You got to ask yourself why. That's a choice. And what was happening there, and this is so pertinent to now, those 8 people were burning out because the entire organization depended on those 8 people. That's crazy. That's highly risky. So when those 8 people go down to 7, which was happening when I was talking to them, with a high probability that they were going down to 5, okay, that goes from unfortunate to cataclysmic, because for them, literally, that would have taken out about 30% of their projects in flight. Now, yes, that's an extreme case, but all of us are looking at that. Then finally, the last recommendation is identify external experts and keep them warm. When I worked at said very large consulting firm, I happened to have met one of our external recruiters. And all that she did was she called, take people to lunch and keep them warm and let them know when we thought we might need them. They're all external consultants. Now, we were professional services. But imagine, even in our world, rather than calling an agency or calling something, we can call somebody. If this organization I was just describing was able to cultivate ex-employees who were now contracting, who might come back for short periods of time to bail them out. I don't know if this is true, but there's a rumor that one of the very top consulting firms never lets go of anybody who leaves their organization. They keep the idea, they keep them on the Rolodex, old term, all the time. So when they go to another company, they get checked in with, what are you doing? How are you? What do you do? So there's always a connection. There's always a possibility of bringing somebody back if it's urgent. I've recently been talking to other organizations, and this was something I put in my Gartner Maverick, which was a future-facing forecast, that at some point in time in the future, corporations might be willing to trade people to handle the supply issue. Now, I know none of us are there, but when I heard this comment coming from people totally unrelated to me, to Gartner, to anything, I'm starting to say, that's creative thinking. So finally, with upskilling, reskilling, and smart partnering, reduce turnover by asking people what they want to learn. People hate sitting in the same job. They hate doing lots of projects where they don't feel they're growing. So there's a lot we can do here. And this is the time of year to start thinking in the thoughts. You don't have to accomplish everything now. But if you go back to what I suggested, understand what the margin of error has been traditionally in the plan, how many disruptions you come up with during a year, start to get a business model of the dynamics that you operate in. Then you can start building this in as time allows. Now, one of the things that Sean's going to be talking about that I am so excited about is reporting features. In the past, you had to do a lot of this by hand, but imagine that you can easily see the concurrency of assignments. How many, is somebody really on 7? And I have seen that. You can just get that report and go, whoops, no. One of the issues that I think we forget is management still thinks of us in our system as a non-visible entity. We need to start communicating better data. Supply, demand, flow rate, measure, how often does the assignment load change? Or does it never? It just goes up. Do we have extended periods of over allocation where after a certain point, people get burned out and they don't want to do this anymore? I was chatting with some people just yesterday and we were commenting about extended 60-hour-a-week, literally year-long project work at 60 hours a week. You really got to incentivize people to do that. And more importantly, when they come off it, you need to give them something that is more restful. Extended periods of context switching, meaning I'm working on this thing and then all of a sudden somebody says, can you solve this? And if I do context, every time I context switch, it costs me between 30 minutes and potentially as long as 3 hours. That's a huge drag on productivity. So we'll have more hard data, and Sean will take you through this, more hard data available to both help you do the analysis and help you plan. So with that, I hope these suggestions have been of some benefit. I want to let everybody know that you can set up a time to talk with me anytime. If I can be of any help on reviewing anything, please do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna. Sean, I am making you the presenter right now. Give me just a second here.
Yeah.
All right, Sean, you will be able to present. Donna, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. Everyone, like Donna had said, if you would like to speak with her, meet with her, you have any questions at all, you just want to run some ideas by her or anyone on our team, feel free to submit a question here or give me an email or have your Tempus admin give me an email. We would love to be of assistance however best we can. All right, and while Sean gets set up here.
All right, so is my screen coming across?
Yes, it is. We do see your PowerPoint.
All right, cool. I'm ready to get going. So thanks everyone for sticking around. So Donna, that was awesome. Thank you so much. My goal in continuing this conversation is really to take you through some key elements of Tempus. And there's a broad range, there's a spectrum of topics to talk about. And the more we do these webinars, the more I think we need to do just extended working sessions, because there's so many options for addressing the laundry list of items that were just reviewed with Tempus, that this is more than a 10 or 15 minute overview of product capabilities. These are things that could be done over the course of an entire day or longer, especially with regards to how we forecast, how we plan, what type of insight is necessary. And everyone's got their own unique little wrinkle to how they do their work and how they communicate it internally. So what I wanted to do here was just take you through a handful of key elements of Tempus. Some of you may be aware of these, some of you may not be, but we'll start with some really, really simple stuff and then get into much more sophisticated things. And I'll actually show you a little bit of preview of a feature that's coming in 6.2, launching next month as part of our Insight Plus product launch, which is our advanced reporting, report delivery, report automation, and report alerting package, where we can gain much more insight than ever before. So we'll take a look at some of those things as well. These are the three things I'm going to cover. Each one of these, there'll be some additional details that we'll drill into, but key to doing any type of annual plan, regardless of whether you're in IT, product development, R&D, audit, the list goes on and on from our different clients. I wanted to talk about portfolio intake. So how do we capture project requests? I think that's some of you might be asking, well, how do I get all this information in? Maybe I have another system and we're going to move it via the API. Maybe we're just going to go in and enter it directly in Tempus. Maybe there's an Excel upload. But just so you're aware, we wanted to cover quickly and briefly the portfolio intake capability that's part of 6.1. The beauty of that feature is that you can open Tempus up to anybody in your organization to submit new projects. So if you're looking at your 2021 plans and wanted everyone from various organizational groups or across the organization to submit they can do that, and there's no additional licensing impact. So I don't want to underestimate or undersell that capability. Second, we'll drill a bit into managing high-level forecasts. So there's the very sophisticated side of looking at the details, and we'll get into that in the third step of identifying bottlenecks and using reporting to find these issues. But how do you just get the data in simply? So I've, over the years of working with clients, one bit of feedback is we just can't get people to go in and put data in, and that's regardless of system. That was the case when I was at Microsoft, as well as along the years of implementing Tempus, of people won't put it into Excel. Just getting people to put it in, and I'll show you a few different options for how we can very easily capture that information at a very high level, or use things like project cloning, or use simulation to identify what a 2021 plan may look like, assuming that a lot of what we've done prior years is going to reflect in future years. And then third, we'll get into identifying bottlenecks. So how do we identify where we have gaps by roles, by skills, by locations, by departments, using very simple grid type reports, and then get into more sophisticated analytics, some of those being the RAR2 and portfolio planner features, but then also into some of the Insight Plus stuff, which is a bit of a preview, and we'll spend more time there as well. All right, and I'll jump back and forth between a live product demo as well as the slides. All right, so the first place I wanted to start is, and I'm obviously aware of that we do have a hard stop here coming up fairly soon, so I'll go maybe a bit more quickly than I'd like, but we'll see. And if I go over, this is being recorded, so you're more than welcome to come back and watch it again, or contact us for a more detailed deep dive to go into more detail. So the first of these is this portfolio intake. Now we did obviously release this with 6.1. We have more and more customers using it, but I did think that it's important to cover this once again, and that is, how do we get information into Tempus? Now, again, you've got the API, Excel upload, you've got direct entry of data, but what about those various pockets of the organization where we want to capture those project requests for 2021? How do we enable that without having to implement a new system, or even build a gateway to something else, or distribute spreadsheets, things like that? So with 6.1, and I'll just drag over an instance of Tempus here, we've introduced a project workflow capability. And those of you that are unfamiliar, when you create these, think of them not so much as the workflow, but think of them like project types. So you might have different project types, small, medium, large. Different organizational groups might have different project types. These are things you probably immediately can come up with based on your organizational needs. But inside of Tempus, under project management, based on your configuration, you can have a range of different project types available. And you'll see those project types from this drop-down list. Now, the project types that I see are based on the configuration of my instance of Tempus. You could choose which users are able to submit which project types. And you could later go turn this off. So if there's a period of time when people have to input and submit their requests for 2021 and get those added as proposals, we can implement that over a time frame and then remove it in a future period. From here, the end user can initiate new projects, and they can create projects and continue to update this proposal form, let's say, over time. So it isn't a one and done type of thing. It's not like, hey, I'm going to submit something into system A, I've got to complete the entire form and submit. So with Tempus, they can build out this proposal or this initiation form over time before they ultimately submit it to you to then take it forward in the forecasting process. The forms themselves are entirely configurable. There's conditionality between sections. We can choose and change layout options of how the fields perform, how they look. You can implement custom tooltips if you wish to do so. You can also change the labeling around names to simplify this. So if you're capturing something like strategy alignment and there's a list of strategies, you can just change the name of the fields as a label to represent or be stated as a question. So what strategy is this submission most closely aligned to? Versus having a much more complex form, we might have descriptions and so on and so forth. And that's supported, but this certainly makes it much easier and much cleaner. You'll also notice the user does get insight into the overall project process or the intake process itself. Doesn't mean they can do anything with it, but at least highlights where this currently sits, that right now this is in the idea stage. And ultimately, once complete, they could move it to the next step, which would now essentially take it out of their control and move it into the PMO, the COE, whatever organizational group reviews these things, or they can save and come back later to continue modifying. All right. So this will greatly improve the ability for end users to participate in this annual planning exercise and remove a lot of the complexities of how the heck do we actually capture this stuff from people. You can add additional notation on the homepage of Tempus as well. That's something new. So if you want to give them insight into where to go to do this. But if I just quickly take you into admin settings under workflow management, assuming you're on 6.1 or later, and really 6.1 and 6.11 is where we're at. So I shouldn't say later, but under workflow management, this is where you would configure this. And we've done sessions in the past on how this is set up. So I would encourage you to watch those or contact us for more information on how these are assembled. But essentially there's 3 steps here. We create the states. You can think of those like the life cycle steps that are involved in managing any project. You have the forms that might be tied to each individual step in the workflow, where we're capturing different information along the way. And then you have the workflow, where you tie these things together in order to build a final, essentially, project state. And you can see inside of any one of these workflows, not only are we configuring the various states and who can edit what, and this might be groups or users and what forms are associated, but you can also choose which users have access to actually submit projects of this type. So this is where you can carve out users from this department can submit these types of projects. Users from this department can submit these types of projects. And again, they don't have to be Tempus users. There's a separate interface where you can set up as many non-Tempus users, workflow only users, as you wish, right? So this should greatly expand on the options you have for capturing these new projects that are going to form a new annual plan. All right, so that's the first key feature that I wanted to make sure we talk through. The second is around how do we form our high-level forecasts or estimates. I've seen, in the time I've been doing this, just dozens of different approaches, some good, some bad, some are just designed to meet the most basic needs. Others are very elaborate. The good news is Tempus can address the vast majority of those cases. But I want to touch on just 3 elements that I think can be quite useful as you go through your annual planning exercises. Some of you may pick up on, maybe one of these, others, all 3 of them might be useful. We'll go through all 3 of them, and then I'm sure there'll be a ton of questions which we'll follow up on separately. The first one I want to show, and it was released previously, but some customers are using this very heavily. Others, I just don't think they're aware of it, and that is the granularity of planning. So for those of you that have had Tempus for a while or using it pretty heavily today, you know that if we, and let's create a new project, we'll just say this is a 2021 annual planning project X, whatever, go ahead and create this. That's good. And if we go into planning, and let's say we're planning using the single project allocation mode, we'll skip the bulk planning modes for now. We'll go ahead and set a time frame. So let's check this out, and we'll say we're planning January 1 of 2021 and to the end of 2021. So this is a year-long project. Normally, our customers are using things like monthly level of entry, weekly, some quarterly, very few daily. Hopefully you're not at that level, but in any case, especially for a forecast for the annual plan. But another feature that was recently introduced is this project level entry. So instead of having to build any level of time phasing, if you just assumed I need 1,000 hours of a role, of a skill, of a named person, whatever level of planning you're performing, you don't have to break it out over a time phase. So if we were to choose maybe design engineer and civil engineer, and how about a project analyst, instead of having to time phase what the effort profile looks like, maybe we don't know. We just know the time frame, and linearly we know the amount of effort. We can use this project option, which can be enabled or disabled globally under general settings. I can input what this quantity is, regardless of mode of entry or data capture you're using. So let's assume we're sticking with hours, and I need 4,000 hours of a design engineer. I need 2,000 hours of a civil engineer, and I need 5,000 hours of a project analyst. Obviously, I'm making this up, it's total nonsense, but the point is I don't have to go in and form this distribution. Tempus does this for me, and this may not be perfectly accurate, but again, we're building our initial steps in an annual plan. how granular do I have to be out of the gate when maybe I have very little information beyond the high level of effort or the overall LOE for this particular initiative, project, audit, program, feature, however you're using and managing Tempus. So this project option is very effective in simplifying data capture. So this is another feature I want to make sure everyone's aware of, especially as it relates to any type of annual planning exercise. And again, this would fit whether we're using FTE, whether we're using cost or time, whatever it may be. And Tempus, of course, will then do the linear distribution as we drill down by quarter, by month, by week, or by day. All right, so another very useful feature set. And while I was putting this together, I thought, should we also spend some time on the assignment level costing, which is another feature we recently released, where typically Tempus would calculate the cost based on the labor rate for that particular resource. And that might be internal or external labor, it's up to you. But we also introduced an ability where an assignment level attribute can be used to override the base rate for a resource. So in the event that you had a project specific rate, assignment specific rate, we can apply that using a custom attribute, and it will override what the resource's rate is if you wish for it to be the case. So again, it won't change anything on the labor or FTE requirements, but if you are very focused on the labor related costs, some of you may be, some of you may not be, that certainly can help you achieve that objective, as opposed to having to now move this elsewhere and apply cost information and so on. So I'm not covering it, but just getting it out there in the event that anyone wants to drill into that deeper in a separate session, definitely let us know. Now, the two other features I wanted to bring up as part of this high-level planning discussion, how we may capture these high-level forecasts, are around using what-if analysis and also around using this project cloning feature. These are often forgotten features, especially when it comes time to do annual planning. And before maybe you get too involved in this process, maybe there's, and I've seen this with some clients, they'll begin a very early, almost pre-annual plan process to start getting some familiarity with, where are you going to have high-level peaks that are becoming problems? What are those wave tops that we need to be aware of before we even get into the full-on annual planning exercise? So it's like a practice run, a preseason to doing the full annual planning. And these two features can be especially helpful in that regard, especially using the Tempus what-if analysis function. Now, before I jump to that one, I will just show you again the project cloning feature. So again, if you're doing the same type of stuff and recognizing there certainly are going to be differences in a project-driven business, but many of our clients do not just projects, but they'll bring over support-related efforts. They'll bring over other activities that may not strictly be defined as project-centric. That's a great opportunity to utilize under project management this cloning function. So next to any project, assuming you have rights to it, there is this clone command. And the clone command is done on a project object by project object basis, but it can help you save a ton of time. So if we're looking at our current portfolio as well as our historical projects that we've completed, I can use this clone command, provide a new name, and now specify a new date. And it's basically just going to shift everything that I choose to keep, and there's a ton of options below that you can currently see, and it's going to shift all these things to a new starting date, which can then feed into my what-if analysis, my supply-demand reporting, my advanced insight reporting, and so on. So in this particular case, we'll keep the cloned name in here, and now we'll say this is something, we're going to do something very similar starting the 1st of 2021. We'll choose what we don't wish to keep. I'm going to clear the actuals from the data set, but I'm going to keep everything else, and we'll go ahead and save that. So this will now generate a copy of that particular project inside of your Tempus instance, again, for things that you can realistically make clones of to reduce the amount of effort required to build out your annual plan. So that's another important feature. The third feature, going a bit out of sequence here, is on the what-if analysis side. So we've had some customers replace certain estimating tools utilizing this what-if analysis feature. So let me launch an instance of what-if analysis, and I'll just jump into any one of these models, maybe this 20 to 2025 plan. Now, hidden away underneath the project options inside of your model, and that's this little O icon here, right? If I click on this, is a feature called clone. So this functions just like the clone function inside of the project management screen. The difference is in the project management screen, those data are persisted. They're now part of your Tempus instance. You can, throw it away if you want, but inside of a model, they exist only in the model. So if I'm asked as a run-up to the annual planning season to kind of get a feel for what will 2022 and 2023 look like, given where we think management is headed or where we think strategy is taking us, I can play these games before I even invest all of the effort required in the annual planning process itself. So if we assume, and I'll just make a really simple case here, we'll do Barcelona phase 13. This is something we're going to do a bunch of things like this next year, and this maybe represents this is a profile of resource distribution that is very similar to the types of work we're expecting to do next year. Inside of my model, I can now create a clone of this, and I can create as many of these as I wish. And you could use this as an exercise to determine where do we start to breach our available capacity. So I might add 20 of these or 30 of these to my model to see what effect that's going to have. So let's assume, let's add 20 of them. We'll set a new start date here. Let's go out to 2021, January. I haven't run this before with this data set, so we'll see if it throws a warning to us we've gone beyond the boundaries, which it might do. And we can then make some adjustments on the overall duration. Do we think it's about the same amount of time with the fixed amount of effort? Or do we think it's around the same distribution of resources, but will take longer, yielding more work, right? So in the event that it's a more complex type of project, you might say going forward, it's roughly 10% more complex. In the models, you can also change resource efficiency, especially now. You'd probably want to take a look at that, given the challenges of not only upskilling, but more importantly and more impactful, finding people and keeping them. So you may wish to look at those settings as well. But let's create these. So we'll go ahead and clone and create 20 of these. And immediately you'll notice, South Africa just kind of blew up here, right? So whatever we cloned was very heavily utilizing these South African resources. But the nice part is I can now quickly identify that issue without having to really spend much time looking at my live data, and I can drill down more deeply if we're looking at things by name, but usually it might be by role or skill or location or something to identify where those issues are going to be. So we can play these what if games ahead of time inside of our model. There they are. And we can start looking at if these are going to be sequenced, what is that going to look like? So we can play these types of games before we even start the process of doing our true laborious annual planning. I can do high level simulations to see, based on what I'm being asked and what I'm hearing, these are some things to look out for to give me advanced intelligence before I get into the planning process to know where I may run into issues. So this cloning function can be massively useful in performing those types of exercises. All right. So moving on to looking at bottlenecks, and I think I've mixed these slides up, but that's okay. 3 areas of the product that I wanted to touch on. One being very simple and basic PivotGrid reports. So how do I even find bottlenecks? And there's like 20 or 30 different places I could take you. But instead of doing that, I figured let's just pick 3 features that are simple, easy to run with, and then we'll get into more of the advanced reporting stuff. The first is under PivotGrid. So if you wanted to know very quickly what is my, where do I have deficits based on what my annual plan looks like, by roles, by skills, by departments, any of those attributes that you're utilizing, or I want to know at those roll-up levels, not just the named individuals, we can do this very easily from the PivotGrid reporting interface. So if I take you there first, let's jump back to this Tempus instance here, and we'll go down into reports. Now, I've already prepared one, but I'll walk you through the setup for the sake of timing here. So here's resource gap analysis. So I prepared this report previously. And what this is showing me is essentially, what is the result of subtracting my allocation from my base or net capacity at a rolled up level. And I'm seeing it by year with a drill down into month. This could be quarter, it could be week, could be day, whatever you wish to see. In this report, I'll refine it a little bit more for the sake of this demonstration. And let's just look at 2021, 22, 23, and so on. There we go. right? So now by doing a basic calculation inside of this PivotGrid report, and we'll look at the definition here in a moment, I can see that right now in Chile, in Qatar, let's see where else, those are where I have deficits based on what maybe my annual plan looks like. And we can see this in real time, right? And we can then drill down to see more specifically, what does that time frame look like? And even as we drill down, we now notice that even, we have issues as well in Armenia, but just for the first quarter. After there, things change a bit, as well as Hong Kong and Kazakhstan, and let's see somewhere else, some other interesting places, all right? Now, the way this report is assembled takes you about 2 minutes to put together. What we're doing here is looking at our resource data by location with a drill down into name, and location is just a custom attribute that we've added to this instance. I'm using year and then month as my columns. We see those here. And then I've added a calculated measure. And for those of you that haven't worked with calculations in the PivotGrid reports, exceptionally simple to do. They're located here at the very bottom of the Object Explorer under calculated measure. And then you'll see measures. And you'll see I've created a bunch of them previously. And the one I'm using is this gap work. And the definition here couldn't be easier, right? This is like first grade math or even earlier. So I have resource base capacity hours minus the planned allocation hours. So that shows me what is my surplus or deficit based on my base capacity. Could also be your net capacity if you're using admin time and calendars and want to move away from those data. And this then yields the calculated value you're seeing here. This is really easy to do. You would select add new dimension. We'd give it a name, and you would drag and drop the various values you wish to use in the calculation. And then your basic symbols or operators, mathematical operators are supported. And you would simply type in what that equation looks like and then save. Those are then persisted in this Object Explorer. They can be used by you or anybody else that builds PivotGrid reports, right? So this is a very simple one, very impactful, very straightforward and to the point, and available with almost no effort to put in place inside of Tempus. So that's one that should be quite helpful as you work through your annual planning exercises. Now, a few more before we get into Insight Plus related preview stuff. We have, of course, the resource allocation reporting 2 and the portfolio planner feature. Now, both RAR2 and portfolio planner are similar. Many of our clients are not as well versed in the portfolio planner feature, and it has some unique capabilities beyond what the RAR2 feature set has. Most importantly, it lets you factor in different project level attributes for ranking and sorting projects. So assuming that capacity line represents the maximum available capacity for resources you've defined in that particular report, you can use that data set to stack the projects, whether you're using a shale or area style chart or a stacked bar chart, to see as I stack those, when do I start to breach? So when do I go over and essentially force out a project that really can't happen because it doesn't sit under the capacity line. So this can be immensely valuable as you're conducting these annual planning exercises to know, great, these are all the things I'm planning to do. I can have happy ears all day about, we're going to do all these projects because we have the budget and it fits under that line from a multi-criteria scoring perspective. But you can see there's a host of them that fall well above our ability to deliver just using static resource data. This is before we look at things like concurrency and allocation levels and flow rates and things like that. So even here, right, we've got a major issue. So the portfolio planner would let us do things in conjunction with the what if model to see how do we move our projects around so that we can do all of these things so that they fit under our supply lines. So let me go ahead and launch that. And this is a really cool feature that many of you may not be aware of. And what I'll do is I'll launch, let's use this one here, this US Army demo. None of this is live data, obviously. But what I've done in this particular portfolio planner, and you can see the ordering of the projects, which can be driven by a custom field. You can drag and drop the ordering, and it's basically telling us how we're stacking the projects until we hit essentially our constraint, being our supply line of the resources that are part of this model. There's also a zoom in function here, so we can look at just specific timeframes if I wanted to do that. That helps. You can also apply color coding in this interface as well, and you can access the tabular data as needed. If you select the folder icon here, this will show you the project list. You can force projects in and out of the decision, and you can also introduce any of your project custom fields to reorder or restack these projects so that those of lower priority perhaps are considered out of what can be delivered in 2021. I keep forgetting it's 2021, by the way. It's been that type of year, I guess. Let's say your 2022 annual plan, right? But more importantly, and in the interest of time, what I wanted to show is that these things are tied or can be tied real time to a model. So if I'm using this as part of an annual planning exercise, and we've brought this up in front of a range of our consumers, our clients, our stakeholders, managers, this one is tied in this case to the US Army demo linked. So let me go ahead and launch that model. And I'll just bring this off to the side here. So there's US Army demo linked. And this is tied together real time. So as I make changes in my what if model, I would see these things move around inside the analysis. So if we see that we clearly have certain projects, how about Stratos phase 9, that based on its priority level cannot happen at this point in time. Now in the model, let's bring this up, and you usually have this on a much bigger screen, but let's go to Stratos phase 9. And now if we said, well, it can't happen at this point, given its priority level and given concurrency of our additional allocations, let's look at moving this out by, let's say a number of months or years. In real time, there's a connection between the what if model and this report that lets us now see, okay, by moving it out, I now am more likely to deliver. I'm now sitting under this time frame. We're sitting under this constraint. And you can continue this exercise. Let's do ERP system, and you'll notice again that these are tied together. And this includes include, exclude, cancellations, expansions, contractions, all the other options we use inside the what if model. We'll move this one again, and notice now our global distribution profile or our annual planning resource distribution profile begins to change. So I can now see, how do my timing updates have to happen in order for these things to all fit in 2021 underneath my constraint. So using your what if analysis session linked to a portfolio planner report is a majorly powerful feature set once you've gotten through the initial pass of, okay, my first filter is maybe the multi-criteria scoring approach or strategy alignment. But now I get to the, where the rubber meets the road, the people and the resources that have to do it. Where do I hit constraints and what changes do I have to make with regard to timing and or priority to better understand how I can actually achieve what I've got listed here. Right, so this is quite useful in that type of planning exercise. I'm glad I had a chance to show that to you. The other piece, of course, is just the what if analysis itself, one of our key feature sets for quite a while. When it comes to identifying bottlenecks, this might be the most effective option. It's been that way for quite some time. And these are, again, built in reports. And the beauty of this is, and let me bring that same screen back across here, and let's go ahead and clear out filtering here, is that this lower grid is dynamic and based on a range of your inputs. So as you're building your annual plan, we could be focusing on just that time frame, and we could build fairly elaborate and complex relationships between the attributes that are used in your environment. And you might be setting these manually, you might be bringing them across from Workday, from PeopleSoft, from SAP, it doesn't matter. We can now form those relationships virtually inside of these dynamic grids. And you've seen, I believe, hopefully, the cool map, the heat maps, grid views, and so on, to identify where those hot spots are. In this case, I'm looking at role, department, and then position to identify in more detail. And you can also use what if analysis to simply look at what is just that overall headcount required. So if we look at just the raw quantity of allocation by heads, this tells me what is needed globally to achieve this, and can also tell me quickly that headcount is insufficient here, here, and elsewhere, right? So you'll find a range of views directly inside of this screen that give us that level of insight, especially the deficits only. So just show me where I have deficits by headcounts based on what my annual plan looks like at the moment. And we can see right away, okay, we have some delivery related challenges here based on our demands, how we're scheduling them for annual plan, and based on our current headcount. And this is where we could also overlay those additional coefficients on resource efficiency, knowing that, as Donna brought up earlier, you're going to lose a certain percentage of FTE just based on upskilling, training, attrition, and other factors alone. And how does that play across your annual plan? So this can be massively useful in that particular exercise. Now, the last thing I'll show you is just a bit of a preview of what's coming here. And let me stop sharing for 1 second. I have to be a little cautious. So let me stop sharing for a moment and bring over a different screen here. Go full screen mode, and then we'll reshare. What I've got on the screen now, and this is something we're working towards releasing and getting in the hands of a few clients for testing, is our Tempus Insight Plus capability. This is a sea change, an order or 2 order of magnitude increase in our overall reporting capability. And this is going to be launching next month. This will give us the ability, or give you the ability, to do sort of unlimited dashboard reporting, report delivery across your organization, as well as report-based alerting. So sending alerts to parties inside your business to understand where issues are taking place. Maybe we've reached guardrails, whatever it may be. But this will give us the ability to do much, much more elaborate and much more business-specific reporting on things like concurrency. So Donna brought this up quite a bit in the earlier part of the presentation. And I know I'm going long, it's intentional. If you have to drop, you have to drop. But in this case, we can identify where we have concurrency related issues, and we can change this parameter inside of the report. So you'll see, in this case, I've done it simply by skill. So I have skill B, I have context switching of 7 projects concurrently inside of November across that group. And we can do this by project or by an attribute, let's say, or by named resource. And the list kind of goes on and on. What is the amount of unallocated work? So once you've committed the annual plan, how much have you actually now started to move into named individuals? So we can look at that information. Flow rates, supply demand, year-over-year planning performance, rate of change in allocation levels month over month. And this goes on and on. So just very elaborate reporting capabilities. And if we drill into any particular reporting feature, we can drill down into the underlying data. We can do things like report annotation, and we can even utilize the product to tell us what are some other visualization options we may want to look at. This will include over 100 different reporting controls and a huge volume of very interactive reporting interfaces that let us convey and tell a much better story around the data that you have in Tempus, which maybe have entered directly or synchronized from other platforms. All right, let me stop sharing one more time, and then I'm going to wrap things up here. You're probably very tired of hearing me talk, which is quite normal. Share my screen again. So I'm just going to wrap up from my perspective. Again, as Samantha mentioned, join us October 13th. She can share that link with you. If you have any questions, please reach out. We'll be releasing Tempus version 6.2 and also the Insight Plus launch. So that's going to be enormous. Hear from a range of your fellow Tempus users, industry experts. If you're interested in speaking and sharing your experience, we'd love to have that. And I've got 2 screen captures here, which I probably shouldn't do, but I do it anyway. Again, Insight Plus is the key element of this release, but there's also going to be a more formalized roadmap feature that'll also be part of Tempus in 6.2. So many of the key features that Donna mentioned are here already. But again, things like dedicated roadmaps versus using Gantt's portfolio Kanban or Tempus models as that roadmap display, we're introducing a dedicated road mapping feature set that we're super excited to introduce as well. So with that said, I will stop. Thank you again for attending, and over to you, Samantha.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Don. All right, everyone, we did go over. However, this will be available in our Help Center by the end of the week to review again, to share with your team, anyone who had to jump off. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.